I never imagined that the life I had built for myself and Philip could be shattered in such a cruel, surreal way. 6 months ago, my husband, the man I had shared 19 years of marriage with, died in a motorcycle accident. A sudden, violent crash that left me widowed at 42, with a 15-year-old son who still struggles to grasp the fragility of life. I thought grief would be the only challenge to navigate, but fate had a cruel twist waiting for me. Then came the knock on my door that morning. Edith, a woman I barely knew, holding a baby that was unmistakably his. She was 29, frazzled, tear-streaked, and desperate. "He's your husband's son," she whispered, and the words hit me like a punch to the chest. A son I never knew existed, a child born out of lies and betrayal, a living reminder of the man I thought I loved. My stomach twisted, my hands shook, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Philip was upstairs, oblivious, playing his video games, while my entire world crumbled in front of me. The images she showed me, the hospital pictures, the texts calling the baby our son, were proof I couldn't ignore. Every late-night business trip, every unexplained credit card charge, every distant conversation I had brushed off as stress at work now painted a different picture. Betrayal, theft, deception. And now the pressure wasn't just from this woman. I found myself facing his parents, his brother, and even friends, all insisting that I take responsibility for this child. All while my own heart was still raw from his lies, and my financial security had been quietly stripped away by his affair. I sat in the living room for what felt like hours, the baby in his mother's arms, Philip quietly in his room, and me questioning everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and family. Could I possibly care for another child that wasn't mine, a child that represented the man who had betrayed me so deeply? Could I protect Philip, my son, from this new reality? My husband was gone, and yet his secrets had followed him into death, haunting every corner of my life. I had no answers, only the raw, unfiltered sensation that my life had been turned upside down. Every call, every message, every visit from family felt like a challenge to my boundaries, a test of my morality, and an intrusion into the fragile peace I was trying to rebuild. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a question clawed at me relentlessly. What does it truly mean to be family when the blood that binds is soaked in betrayal? I was 23 when I first met him, 47 am now, but then 28, confident, charming, a regional sales manager with a smile that could disarm anyone. I was a fresh graduate, working part-time as a bookkeeper, juggling numbers and spreadsheets while dreaming about the kind of life I wanted to build. We met at a business networking event. He approached me, complimented my insight on a financial trend, and somehow made the world feel like it had shrunk to just the two of us. There was an instant connection, a spark I mistook for destiny. We dated for 2 years before marrying. Those early years were a balance of excitement and compromise, weekends exploring the city, quiet nights at home, arguments about minor things like what to cook or whether we should redecorate the living room. He traveled frequently for work, and I trusted him completely, thinking long flights and hotel stays were just part of his career. I never imagined that those trips would later be threads unraveling the life I thought we shared. When Philip was born, my world shifted. Being a mother at 27 brought a mix of joy and responsibility I hadn't anticipated. Philip, now 15, was my anchor, my reminder of what truly mattered amidst the chaos of adult life. I arranged my schedule so I could be home for him, balancing bookkeeping from my small home office with the daily rhythm of parenting. My husband was the primary breadwinner. I was proud of him and happy to play my part in keeping our family stable. For the first 16 years, our marriage seemed normal. We argued occasionally about money or Philip's routines, but nothing that seemed irreparable. We had traditions, little habits that made our home predictable and comforting. He was a man of routines, often distant when absorbed in work, but always returning with a smile that promised everything would be okay. I knew him, or I thought I did. About 3 years ago, subtle changes began creeping in. He became secretive with his phone, stepping into other rooms to take calls. He started going to the gym obsessively, buying new clothes, and suddenly, our shared credit card showed charges at restaurants in cities he claimed to be on business trips, amounts that seemed extravagant for a single meal. When I asked, he claimed client entertainment, and I wanted to believe him. I had suspicions, fleeting and unsettling, but nothing concrete. Those months were a haze of small doubts. I noticed him checking his phone at odd hours, closing tabs when I entered the room, coming home with smells of unfamiliar perfumes on his jacket. I brushed it off. Work stress, I told myself, or maybe midlife confusion. I wanted to trust him. I needed to trust him. The love I had invested over nearly 2 decades made the possibility of betrayal unbearable to even consider. Our life together, seemingly ordinary to outsiders, was a delicate equilibrium. Philip thrived in school. We had routines that kept us sane, and our marriage, though not perfect, was our shared history. I had no reason to suspect that beneath the surface a hidden life existed, a life that would come crashing into my world with the arrival of a stranger and her child, a revelation that would destroy the foundation I had worked so hard to build. Now, looking back, I see the tiny red flags I ignored, the late-night calls, the unexplained expenses, the new wardrobe, the distant smiles. They were pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve, fragments of a truth too painful to acknowledge until it could no longer be hidden. The first time I felt the uneasy stirrings of suspicion, it was subtle, almost imperceptible. He came home from a supposed business trip looking unusually tired but impeccably groomed, his cologne sharper, his smile a fraction too practiced. I noticed the way he brushed past my questions, his fingers tapping nervously on the kitchen counter, a text always awaiting him at odd hours. I told myself I was imagining it. I wanted to be imagining it. But the doubts didn't stay buried. The credit card charges continued. Dinners in cities I'd never been to, gift shops that didn't make sense for client entertainment. And every time I asked, his answers were clipped, rehearsed, defensive. He spoke of entertaining clients, of work dinners and networking. But the justifications never felt right. Something in the cadence of his voice, the way his eyes flicked away, told me that the truth was veiled. Family and friends unintentionally fueled my unease. His mother would call to check in, sometimes making veiled comments about taking care of people in need, as if dropping hints about some responsibility I didn't know I had. Friends mentioned meeting him in places he hadn't told me about, passing along stories he had casually dismissed. Each retelling made my stomach tighten, each innocent observation a whisper of a hidden world I wasn't part of. The tension at home grew almost imperceptibly. I found myself scanning the apartment for signs, receipts hidden in drawers, unfamiliar scents on his clothes, the occasional phone buzzing in silence. Philip, oblivious to the storm building around him, continued with his routines, laughing, practicing guitar, growing into a teenager who trusted both of us implicitly. I felt a pang of guilt with every doubt. Was I projecting? Was I overreacting? Or were these subtle threads of betrayal unraveling before my eyes? One afternoon, I caught myself staring at a series of text messages he left open on the screen. Messages from a name I didn't recognize. I immediately closed it, heart hammering. My mind raced with scenarios I didn't want to consider. I remembered the early days, how every decision had felt transparent, how we had built a home together, a family, a life. And now the shadow of doubt seeped into every corner, every shared meal, every conversation. I began keeping mental notes, cataloging small irregularities, trying to convince myself that I was overanalyzing. But the more I observed, the more the pattern emerged. Secrecy replacing transparency, avoidance replacing intimacy, and a strange, undeniable distance in the man I had loved for nearly 2 decades. Evenings became tense, weighted with things unsaid. He would return from his trips with stories of clients and networking dinners, and I would smile, nodding, hiding the knot in my chest. Philip would ask innocent questions about his father's work, and I would answer, my voice calm, my thoughts racing. The foundation of our family, which had once felt solid, now trembled under the weight of my growing suspicion. It wasn't just the behavior itself, it was the betrayal brewing behind it, invisible yet palpable. The fear of what I didn't know, the possibility of a secret life that might shatter everything, lingered like a dark cloud over our home. Little did I know, these seeds of conflict were merely the beginning of a storm that would engulf every aspect of my life, testing my resilience, my judgment, and my love for Philip. It was a Saturday morning that started like any other, or so I thought. The sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, dust motes dancing lazily in the warm beams. Philip was upstairs, headphones on, playing video games, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to hit. I had just finished tidying the breakfast dishes when I heard the soft but urgent knock on the door. I opened it to find Edith, the stranger with tear-streaked cheeks, standing there, a baby boy cradled in her arms. My breath caught in my throat, a cold shiver racing down my spine. The infant's eyes blinked up at me, and my stomach twisted. This wasn't just any visitor. This child was a living testament to my husband's betrayal. "I'm so sorry to come like this," she said, her voice trembling, "but he's your husband's son. He needs someone." She lifted the baby slightly, showing me tiny hospital photos, texts, and a few keepsakes that made it undeniable. My husband had fathered this child in secrecy, promising a life with her that never came. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. My hands, which had just been washing dishes, were clammy. My legs felt heavy, as though the floor beneath me had turned to quicksand. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. My mind raced, images of our life together flashing like a film reel. The trips he took, the late nights, the unexplained expenses, the whispered phone calls behind closed doors. Every detail suddenly had a new meaning, every memory tinged with betrayal. I could feel a hollow ache in my chest, a mix of disbelief, rage, and a piercing sadness that left me momentarily paralyzed. Edith's voice cut through the fog. He said this was our son. He wanted to be with me, but he left. He stopped calling. He stopped helping." Her words were punctuated by quiet sobs, the baby squirming slightly in her arms. She handed me her phone, showing texts where he called the baby his son, spoke of promises, plans, dreams that had been nothing but illusions. I remember standing there, staring at the infant, the tiny fingers curling around the blanket, and feeling the weight of my own helplessness. My body was tense, my breathing shallow, every instinct screaming that the life I thought I had was a lie. And yet, amid the shock, a wave of maternal protectiveness for Philip surged. How could I shield my son from this duplicity? How could I protect him from the man he loved and trusted, from the lies that had been embedded in our lives for years? When my husband returned home that evening from a golf outing with friends, I waited until Philip was asleep. I confronted him, my voice calm on the surface but trembling underneath. "I saw her," I said, holding back tears. "The woman, the baby, how long?" At first, he denied everything, his eyes darting, lips pressed thin. He claimed she was lying, that it was some scam. But the truth was written in his silence when I mentioned the photos, the texts. His shoulders slumped, the confident facade crumbling. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he confessed. "It began as a fling," he said, "a moment of weakness on a business trip to Phoenix. It spiraled," he claimed, "into something more. He had made promises, lied, stolen, but now he wanted to fix it." The room seemed to tilt around me. My chest constricted, my jaw locked. Betrayal, anger, sorrow, all collided, and my hands shook as I clutched the edge of the kitchen counter. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to rip out the truth like a cancer from our lives. Instead, I felt a hollow, terrifying clarity. The marriage I had built, the life I had nurtured, had been infiltrated by lies so deep they were almost impossible to unravel. Over the next weeks, I discovered the financial deception. $40,000 gone from our joint savings account, funds earmarked for Philip's college and a future we had planned together. Bank statements, hidden transactions, excuses about overtime pay, bonuses, all a carefully constructed smokescreen. Every number, every line item was a reminder that betrayal had been systematic, deliberate. I hired a divorce attorney, beginning the painful process of separating finances and untangling the life we had shared. Each day, each document, each confrontation brought a mixture of dread and resolve. I had to protect Philip, reclaim our life, and confront a husband who had built a secret world within the one I thought we shared. That Saturday morning, standing in the doorway, watching Edith cradle a child that shouldn't have existed, I understood for the first time the magnitude of what had been hidden from me. The illusion of our normal life was shattered, and nothing would ever be the same again. That night, after Philip was asleep, I sat alone in the quiet house, the weight of everything pressing down like a vice. The baby's face, Edith's tearful eyes, my husband's confession, all played over and over in my mind. My body felt hollow, drained, as if all the energy had been pulled from me, leaving only tension and disbelief. I wanted to scream, to shake the walls of this house and force the truth out of every shadowed corner. But I didn't. I couldn't. For Philip's sake, I had to stay composed. I kept asking myself the same questions, over and over. How did I miss this? Were the signs really so subtle, or was I just unwilling to see them? The late-night calls, the distant smiles, the trips he claimed were work, they weren't mistakes. They were threads weaving a secret life that I had no idea existed. And yet, part of me felt responsible. Could I have stopped it? Could I have noticed sooner, questioned harder, pried deeper? The questions tormented me, gnawing at my sense of judgment and self-worth. At the same time, anger surged. Anger at him for the deceit and betrayal, for the theft of $40,000, for the life he had carefully hidden from me while expecting me to remain blind. Anger at Edith for showing up with the embodiment of his lies, though I knew she was a victim too, deceived, abandoned, desperate. Anger at his family, who would soon pressure me, expecting me to take on a child I had no bond with, as if my life and grief were secondary to their moral expectations. I could feel the tension in my chest tighten, a physical manifestation of my inner storm. My hands shook as I poured myself a cup of tea, staring into the steam rising from the mug, hoping the warmth would somehow anchor me. But no comfort came. Sleep evaded me. I listened to the house breathe around me, each creak of the floorboards, echoing the betrayal that had shattered our family. Eventually, I knew I had to confront him again, not just with accusations, but with the unflinching reality of his actions. I needed answers, boundaries, acknowledgement of the life he had secretly created and the damage he had wrought. I waited for Philip to fall asleep, then called him into the living room. My voice was steady, though every word weighed heavily on my chest. "We need to talk," I said, and for the first time I saw fear and regret flicker across his face. I demanded clarity. The timeline, the financial deceit, the promises he made to Edith, the ways he had hidden his life while expecting ours to continue unscathed. Each revelation cut deeper, but I kept my composure, anchoring myself in the knowledge that I had to be the calm in the storm for Philip. He tried to justify, to apologize, to minimize, but I could see through the excuses. The betrayal was not a single act, it was years of deception. After the confrontation, I retreated to my bedroom, closing the door, sitting on the edge of the bed with my face in my hands. My thoughts oscillated between fury, grief, and icy determination. I realized something essential. I could not undo what he had done, but I could control what came next. Philip's well-being, our home, our future. I had to take responsibility for that, even as I wrestled with heartbreak. I also realized that avoiding the truth for Philip's sake was no longer sustainable. Secrets had a way of surfacing, and he deserved honesty, though delivered carefully, in a way that protected him while acknowledging the reality of his father's actions. The moral weight of the situation pressed on me. I had to navigate grief, anger, and betrayal, all while being a mother first, a protector, a guide. By morning, my resolve was solidifying. I would not allow my husband's lies to dictate our lives further. I would stand firm in protecting Philip, setting boundaries with his family, and untangling the mess left behind. And while I felt the deep sting of betrayal every moment, I knew that facing it directly, rather than collapsing under it, was the only way forward. I also understood that this confrontation was just the beginning. The financial theft, the affair child, the relentless pressure from his family, all were complications I would have to face head-on. But for the first time, I felt a flicker of clarity. I was not powerless. I would navigate this storm, not as a victim, but as a mother, a woman who refused to let someone else's sins dictate the course of her life and her son's future. The tension began to snowball almost immediately. Within a week of the confrontation with my husband, his parents had begun calling daily, sometimes multiple times a day. Each ring of the phone felt like a hammer striking against the fragile wall I had built around my grief. "We need to talk about the baby," my mother-in-law would say, her voice thick with expectation, not concern. "He's our grandson. You have the means now. You must help." I refused each time, politely but firmly. I reminded them that the child was the result of my husband's betrayal, that I had no legal responsibility, and that my first duty was to Philip. But their persistence did not waver. They sent photographs of the baby, images of him smiling with his father in hospital photos I hadn't wanted to see. They reminded me, subtly, cruelly, of the life I was missing out on for Philip, and the life my husband had hidden from me. Then came my husband's brother. He called, attempting reason, or at least what he framed as reason. "Mom and Dad can't take care of the baby for much longer," he said. "Edith's family is struggling. You're the only one who can provide stability, even temporarily. We can support you financially." His tone was measured, practical, almost persuasive, but it carried an undercurrent of accusation. I felt my chest tighten, a mix of fury and disbelief. How could they presume to make me complicit in the consequences of his affair? At the same time, new evidence began to surface. Bank statements I had been sifting through revealed more than just the $40,000 missing. It was systematic, regular transfers, hidden withdrawals, unexplained deposits that coincided with his trips, his supposed overtime, his client dinners. Each revelation struck like a new betrayal, each line on the statement a reminder that the life I had thought secure had been systematically dismantled behind my back. Friends and acquaintances, once neutral, began weighing in as well. Some, upon hearing fragmented stories, expressed disappointment in me for not being generous or not helping the baby. Others, closer to the family, sided with the in-laws. Each conversation felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of judgment. I could see the narrative forming around me, the widow with the means, refusing to help the innocent child of a cheating husband. The world was simplifying my pain into a moral obligation I had never agreed to accept. At home, Philip's world began to shift as well. He could sense the tension, even before he knew the full story. Conversations that should have been light, about school or friends, were now colored by whispered arguments and my distracted silence. I noticed him withdrawing, spending more time in his room, headphones on, sometimes leaving notes for me instead of speaking. My heart ached, knowing that the very child I was protecting from the betrayal was absorbing the collateral damage in subtle, heartbreaking ways. Then came the confrontation that tested me further. My mother-in-law arrived unannounced one afternoon, the baby in her arms, a thin smile plastered over her frustration. "You just have to hold him," she said. "See how you feel. He's innocent. Don't you want to do what's right?" Her words hit me like an accusation. My hands went cold, my jaw tightened. "No," I said, holding the door between us. "He's not my responsibility. You chose to bring him here without asking. Leave." She refused at first, her voice rising, neighbors peeking through windows, but I stood my ground. She left, muttering under her breath, but the escalation had already done its damage. The ripple effect of his family's interference was unrelenting. That evening, I sat on the couch, Philip next to me, but not really there. The weight of months of deceit, betrayal, financial theft, and now external pressure from every angle bore down on me. I allowed myself a quiet moment of grief, letting the tears fall, acknowledging the exhaustion and rage coiled tightly inside. And then, slowly, clarity began to emerge. I couldn't control what they thought, what they demanded, or what my husband had done, but I could control my response. I could protect Philip. I could set boundaries, assert my autonomy, and refuse to be dragged into a situation that was never mine to begin with. Something shifted inside me. The fear and shock gave way to resolve. The betrayals, the pressure, the unrelenting demands, they no longer dictated my emotions entirely. I was angry, yes, but that anger became a tool, not a cage. I began to plan how I would handle the in-laws' next call, the baby's next visit, and Philip's questions about a half-brother he didn't yet know existed. I began to recognize that my grief did not make me weak. It made me strategic, vigilant, and, most importantly, protective of my son and our life. By the end of that week, I felt something I hadn't in months, a sense of internal fortitude. The storm was intensifying, but I was no longer flailing in its gusts. I had a plan. I had boundaries. I had Philip, and that was enough to anchor me. And while the escalation outside would continue, calls, texts, legal threats, I was beginning to see that I would not be coerced into taking responsibility for someone else's mistakes. This was my turning point in the fight for my life, my son, and my sanity. I woke up that night to silence. But it wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, oppressive. Philip was asleep, safe in his room, oblivious to the weight pressing down on me. But I couldn't find rest. Every corner of the house seemed to echo the betrayals of the past months. The betrayal of my husband, the theft of our savings, the lies hidden behind every smile, every casual touch, and now the relentless pressure from his family, demanding I shoulder responsibility for a child that was not mine. I sat on the edge of my bed, knees pulled to my chest, staring at the floor as the hours stretched like days. The exhaustion was not just physical, it was emotional, spiritual. I felt like I was drowning in a tide of anger, grief, and helplessness. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine life without a way out, without a solution, without hope. Every call, every message, every reminder of what had been taken from me felt like a weight pressing down, heavier than I could bear. The image of the baby, innocent and vulnerable, haunted me. I knew he had done nothing wrong. He had no idea he was the product of deception. And yet, here he was, a symbol of everything that had been stolen from me. Philip, my son, was caught in the crossfire, his father gone, his mother heartbroken, and now a new sibling he didn't even know existed threatening to reshape his world. I felt the crushing guilt of failure, failing to protect him from heartbreak, failing to keep our lives intact, failing to control a world that had spun wildly beyond my grasp. Even moments of solace, reading a book, making tea, or listening to Philip laugh while gaming, were pierced by the relentless mental replay of conversations, texts, and encounters. His parents calling, demanding, pressuring, Edith's voice trembling on the phone, pleading for assistance, my husband's memory hovering over every decision I had to make. The room felt smaller, the walls closer, the air thick with unspoken accusations. I realized how alone I truly was. Friends offered opinions, some supportive, some judgmental, but none could step fully into the storm I was living. None could hold the weight for me. I thought about the future, about the baby, about Philip, about myself. Would I ever find peace? Could I rebuild a life after such comprehensive betrayal? The thought of facing each day, knowing the world judged me for refusing to take on a child that wasn't mine, was almost too much. My hands shook, my chest constricted, and tears streamed freely. For the first time, I allowed myself to grieve, not just my husband's death, but the life I thought we had, the marriage that was never truly ours, and the security stolen by years of deceit. In that darkness, I confronted an uncomfortable truth. I could not control others. I could not fix the consequences of his choices, no matter how desperately I wanted to protect Philip and myself. Every demand, every call, every plea was a reminder that life could be cruel, that justice and fairness did not always align with responsibility or morality. And yet, amid the despair, a flicker of resolve began to form. Even as I curled into myself, feeling the weight of loneliness and despair, I realized I had survived worse. Years of compromises, sacrifices, and hidden anxieties in our marriage. I had protected Philip through every challenge, every conflict, and if I could do that, I could endure this. I could navigate the storm. I could find the boundaries that would protect our lives. By dawn, my tear-streaked face reflected a mix of exhaustion and clarity. The darkness had not broken me. It had revealed the depths of what I was willing to endure, and the necessity of making decisions rooted in truth, integrity, and protection for my son. I had reached rock bottom, but from this abyss I would rise with a plan, with purpose, and with the strength that only despair can forge. I understood then that the world could demand anything, but I would choose carefully what I allowed into my life. I would protect Philip, I would protect myself, and I would navigate the next steps with clarity, not chaos. The weeks of relentless pressure, grief, and sleepless nights had left me exhausted, but also sharper than ever. I realized that I could no longer drift in reaction to others' demands. The in-laws, Edith, even the shadow of my late husband's mistakes, they would not dictate my life. I needed clarity, proof, and, most importantly, resolve. It started with the documents. I pulled out the bank statements, cross-checked payments, tracked withdrawals, and compiled every irregularity into a comprehensive timeline. $40,000 siphoned from our joint account, every deposit to Edith mapped, every client dinner noted with precise dates and amounts. The patterns were undeniable. This was not a lapse or a moment of weakness. This was calculated, systematic deceit. Holding that evidence in my hands, I felt a flicker of vindication. I was not imagining it. The betrayal was real, and now so was my power. Next came my conversations with the lawyer. I outlined the extent of the deception, the threats of financial coercion from the in-laws, and the repeated demands from Edith for my involvement. He confirmed what I had suspected. I had no legal obligation to support a child that wasn't mine. I was still the surviving spouse on paper, yes, but that status did not impose parental responsibility for an affair child. I could stand firm. I could enforce boundaries. At the same time, I reflected on myself. Months of being manipulated, pressured, and doubted had forced me to see my own strength. I was not a passive victim. I had managed a household, raised Philip, kept our finances in order, and confronted lies I never expected to face. My grief and anger were valid, yes, but they did not define me. I realized that protecting myself and my son was not selfish. It was necessary. I began to shed the guilt the world wanted to heap on me for refusing to raise a child that represented another woman's choices and my husband's betrayals. Then came the message from my brother-in-law, the final piece. He and his wife had decided to adopt the baby. No longer would the in-laws pressure me. No longer would Edith's pleas claw at my conscience. The child would have a home with family members who were equipped to care for him. The weight lifted slightly from my chest. For the first time in months, I felt a cautious sense of relief. I called Philip into the living room that evening. "There's something I need to tell you," I said gently. I explained that his half-brother would be adopted by family, that he would have a home where he would be loved, and that this did not change our family or our life. Philip absorbed it quietly, his eyes reflecting understanding and relief. "At least he's going to be safe," he said softly. I nodded, feeling the tension in my chest ease, knowing that I had protected him from further pain while still acknowledging the truth. In the days that followed, I began asserting myself. I told my mother-in-law, once and for all, that I would no longer be contacted regarding the child except through legal channels. I set boundaries with Edith, blocked repeated attempts at coercion, and informed my husband's lawyer that any further demands for financial support were unwarranted. I was no longer swayed by guilt, manipulation, or external pressure. It was not vindictive, it was self-preservation. And in that act, I felt a powerful shift. For the first time since my world had unraveled, I was in control of my own life again. I recognized my worth, my right to make decisions for Philip, and my authority over our home and resources. The betrayal had tested me, but it had also forged a sharper, stronger version of myself. A woman who could face deception, grief, and moral dilemmas and emerge not broken, but determined. By the end of that week, I understood a profound truth. Life would always throw chaos, deceit, and demands I never asked for. But the measure of strength was in how I chose to respond. I had chosen boundaries. I had chosen my son. I had chosen to protect the life we were rebuilding. And that choice, grounded in clarity and self-respect, was the first real step toward reclaiming our peace. Once I had asserted my boundaries, set the rules, and accepted that the baby would be raised by my brother-in-law and his wife, the world around me began to shift in ways I hadn't anticipated. The pressure that had felt inescapable loosened, revealing the cracks in my late husband's family and the fragile illusions they had built around me. His parents were the first to feel the consequences. Calls that had once come multiple times a day became sparse, hesitant. each one laced with resentment. The relentless moral pressure they tried to place on me now revealed itself as misplaced frustration. They had chosen to involve me in a situation I had no responsibility for, and when I refused to acquiesce, their authority and influence crumbled. Their expectations clashed with legal reality and my firm stance, and for the first time, they were confronted with the limitations of their power. Even Edith, desperate and fragile for so long, had to face the consequences of her choices. With the baby in stable hands and her financial instability exposed, she could no longer lean on me as a crutch. The consequences of her actions, the affair, the secrecy, the breakdown, were hers to manage. I did not gloat, I did not interfere, but I observed with a detached clarity that came from surviving the chaos. For the first time, the cycle of dependency and pressure I had been ensnared in began to unwind, and it was not my responsibility to fix the world that my husband and others had created. Philip, too, was able to process the fallout in his own way. Once the baby was in his uncle's care, he seemed lighter, freer. He no longer carried the weight of my family's guilt or the moral complexities of his father's actions. His questions came cautiously at first, curious, tentative, but he saw that the child was in a loving environment and that our home remained stable. I could see the tension leaving his shoulders, the way he smiled again during dinner, the way his laughter filled the rooms without hesitation. In protecting him, I had restored not only his peace, but my own. I found myself walking through the house, now quieter than it had been in months, feeling a sense of ownership over my own life. The baby's absence no longer felt like a loss to me. It was a resolution. The chaos that had threatened to drown us had been addressed, and the only thing I needed to tend to was Philip and the life we were rebuilding together. I realized that standing firm had not been cruelty. It had been an act of love, a defense of the life we had fought to protect. The repercussions extended beyond phone calls. My late husband's reputation, once carefully curated, began to erode. Friends who had sympathized with him and his family now saw the truth. A man who had built a double life, stolen from his family, and left destruction in his wake. Texts, emails, and social whispers carried the weight of exposure. The illusion of his perfect career-driven persona faltered, leaving only the consequences of his choices. Even within his family, the hierarchy and authority he once held through his spouse's compliance diminished. The brother-in-law who had assumed responsibility for the baby now emerged as a stabilizing figure, demonstrating that solutions could exist without my submission. The in-laws, initially relentless, now had to reconcile with the reality that their moral expectations had no binding force on me. Their anger, frustration, and disappointment, once directed at me as leverage, now reflected back on them, a subtle, inevitable consequence of their own decisions. And me? I walked away from it all with a strange, unexpected sense of peace. I did not gloat. I did not punish. I simply acted according to my principles, protecting my son, asserting my boundaries, and reclaiming the life that had been overshadowed by betrayal and manipulation. The world could judge me, call me selfish, or call me heartless. It no longer mattered. The truth was intact, the wrongs had been exposed, and the future was finally ours to define. The house felt lighter. Philip's laughter returned, the rooms felt warm again, and the rhythms of daily life, school, homework, bedtime, regained their balance. I had survived deception, grief, and relentless external pressure and emerged intact. The fallout had settled where it belonged, and in that settlement, I found not vengeance, but clarity, strength, and a renewed sense of self. The house was quiet in a way that felt different, lighter, warmer, freer. The storm of the past months had finally passed, leaving only the calm clarity of what truly mattered. Philip's laughter echoed through the rooms again. Dinner conversations returned to school, friends, and small daily victories, rather than whispered anxieties and the shadow of betrayal. I could feel the tension that had wrapped around my shoulders for months finally dissolve. I looked at Philip and realized how much we had survived together. Not just the death of his father, but the hidden life, the lies, the financial theft, the relentless pressure from those who thought they could dictate my choices. We had endured, and we had emerged stronger. I allowed myself to feel relief, gratitude, and slowly, joy. It was a quiet celebration of resilience, a testament to the fact that love, when steadfast and grounded, could withstand even the most insidious betrayals. I also learned the boundaries of compassion and responsibility. The affair child, innocent though he was not mine to raise. Protecting myself and Philip did not make me cruel. It made me prudent, responsible, and fiercely protective of what was ours to care for. I realized that sometimes the kindest act is to step back, to allow others to face the consequences of their choices, and to refuse to be coerced into repairing what is not your responsibility. The lesson crystallized in daily life. I began to focus on rebuilding, not just for Philip, but for myself. Small pleasures returned, rearranging the furniture, cooking meals I loved, reading late at night, tending to my work without distraction, and enjoying the simple joys of life that had been overshadowed by grief and betrayal. I understood that self-care, boundaries, and integrity are not luxuries. They are necessities. I thought about the audience who might hear this story. Life often places impossible demands, moral dilemmas, and situations shaped by other people's mistakes upon us. But the truth remains, you do not owe the world your suffering. Protect your peace. Make decisions grounded in reality, not guilt or manipulation. Stand firm, even when it feels lonely. And in doing so, you teach those you love, like Philip, the value of strength, honesty, and self-respect. As the sun set over our quiet home, I felt a sense of renewal. The past would not define us. Philip and I had our lives, our choices, and our integrity intact. The chapter of betrayal had closed, leaving behind a lesson in resilience, courage, and the unwavering power of protecting those you love while honoring yourself. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was ours. And for the first time in months, that uncertainty felt like possibility, not fear.